Decades of deceit from husband S shadow to killer S confession. The evidence screamed betrayal, pointing a finger at the grieving husband for over 2 decades. But the true killer was a ghost hiding in plain sight, a chilling echo from the past. What if the person you least suspected held the darkest secret, a secret that took 20 years to unearth? Prepare for a descent into a deception so profound. It took a DNA revolution to expose the horrifying truth. The ordinary hum of a Tuesday morning in Chevy Chase, Maryland, shattered at precisely 8:17 a.m. on May 2, 2001. The calm of Montgomery County dissolved into a cacophony of fear with a single frantic call to 911. Inside the unassuming residence at 4824 Drummond Avenue, a life had been brutally extinguished, leaving behind a scene that would haunt the investigators assigned to the case for decades. Leslie Prier, a woman seemingly woven into the fabric of her community, lay dead in the master bedroom, her body bearing the brutal testament of multiple blunt force trauma impacts and the chilling finality of strangulation. The initial sweep of the house revealed an unsettling quiet, no signs of forced entry, no shattered windows, no splintered doors. It was a detail that whispered a dangerous truth: the killer was likely not a stranger, but someone familiar, someone who had perhaps been welcomed across Leslie's threshold. Brett, Leslie's employer, a man accustomed to the predictable rhythm of his business, found himself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. When Leslie, a diligent employee, failed to arrive for her shift, a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He attempted to reach her at home, only to be met by the sterile finality of an answering machine. A call to Leslie's husband, Sandy, a man known to Brett more casually as Carl Prier, confirmed their shared disquiet. Sandy, already on his way to check on his wife, was met by Brett at the scene. Together, they breached the silent house, their initial unease rapidly escalating into sheer terror. Overturned furniture and dark, ominous stains marred the foyer's pristine surface, a stark contrast to the normalcy of the suburban street outside. Brett's voice, strained and barely audible, relayed the horrifying details to the 911 operator: blood, disarray, and the chilling absence of Leslie herself. As Sandy searched deeper into the house, his calls for his wife echoing in the oppressive silence, the true scope of the tragedy began to unfold, setting in motion an investigation that would test the limits of patience and the very definition of justice. The initial interviews painted a grim tableau. Sandy's account of his morning, his timing, his observations upon entering the house, all would become points of intense scrutiny. Brett, too, his own account of discovering the scene, his movements, his immediate actions, would be dissected and re-examined, each word a potential key or a deliberate misdirection in the hunt for a killer who had, in the starkest terms, staged a tragedy. The foundation of the investigation was laid not on a swift apprehension, but on the slow, agonizing accumulation of questions and the chilling realization that the perpetrator was a shadow lurking within Leslie's own orbit. Detective Tara Augustine and Detective Dupo found themselves navigating a treacherous landscape of half-truths and guarded silences. The initial sweep of Leslie Prier's home had yielded little in the way of definitive forensic evidence. No fingerprints of an unknown assailant, no discarded weapon, only the pervasive scent of tragedy and the chilling absence of forced entry. This void, this lack of external intrusion, inevitably drew their gaze inward towards the very heart of the household. Sandy, Leslie's husband, had been cooperative, his narrative a tapestry of shock and grief, yet threads of inconsistency began to emerge, catching the sharp light of their investigation. His account of that fateful morning, the precise timeline, his movements, and his immediate reactions upon entering the blood-spattered foyer felt rehearsed, almost too neat. He described finding an overturned table, a purse on the floor, and a significant amount of blood near the doorway. Then, the dog, a creature seemingly oblivious to the horror, emerged from the basement prompting Sandy to suggest a search of the lower level. Brett, still present at the scene, confirmed Sandy's exploration of the house, including the basement and the upper floors. He recalled seeing blood splatter on the stairs leading to the second floor. Yet, Sandy's own testimony, particularly his admission of not checking the master bedroom bathroom, a detail that seemed glaringly obvious given the eventual discovery of Leslie's body there, planted a seed of doubt. Why overlook such a critical area? The autopsy report further muddied the waters while it confirmed homicide. The pathologist struggled to pinpoint a precise time of death, with some speculating it could have occurred the night before, contradicting Sandy's assertion that he saw Leslie that very morning. The presence of dry blood observed by Brett and Sandy seemed to support the possibility of an earlier demise, a timeline that didn't quite align with Sandy's narrative of a recent departure. As the days turned into weeks, Sandy's demeanor shifted. The initial veneer of a grieving husband began to fray, replaced by an increasing wariness, a subtle withdrawal that spoke volumes to the seasoned detectives. He became less forthcoming, his answers more clipped, his explanations more evasive. This subtle transformation, this palpable tightening of his guard, served as a powerful catalyst for the investigators. It was a clear signal that Sandy was harboring something, an unspoken truth that he was desperately trying to conceal. The detectives pressed, re-interviewing him, circling back to the same points, probing for any crack in his composure. They observed his interactions, his reactions, looking for any flicker of deception or undue stress. The absence of strong forensic evidence meant that they had to rely heavily on the psychology of the suspect, on the inconsistencies in his story, and on the subtle cues that betrayed his internal state. It was during this period of intense pressure and mounting suspicion that Sandy made a pivotal decision. He hired an attorney. This move, while legally sound, only served to amplify the investigators' conviction that Sandy possessed knowledge he was actively withholding. The shadow of suspicion deepened, casting a long, dark silhouette over the husband, who now stood at the epicenter of the baffling and brutal murder of Leslie Prier. The hunt for justice, stalled by the lack of definitive proof, had become a psychological chess match, with Sandy's silence and evasiveness the most formidable pieces on the board. The unanswered questions, the inconsistencies in his account, the very fact of his legal counsel, all coalesced into a powerful, unspoken accusation, leaving investigators convinced that Sandy was not merely a grieving husband, but a man deeply entangled in the dark secret of his wife's demise. The years had a way of burying truth, each passing season adding another layer of dust to the unsolved murder of Leslie Prier. The initial flurry of investigation had cooled, leaving behind the persistent chill of an unresolved case. Sandy, Leslie's husband, had passed away years prior, still carrying the unspoken weight of suspicion, his name forever linked to the tragedy of May 2nd, 2001. Detectives Tara Augustine and Detective Dupo, new custodians of the cold case, found themselves staring at the same dead ends that had stymied their predecessors. The forensic evidence, or rather the lack thereof, was a ghost in itself, an echo of violence without a source. But the dawn of the 21st century brought with it revolutionary tools, and for Augustine and Dupo, the answer lay hidden within the very fabric of Leslie's final moments. Deep within the evidence locker, preserved meticulously, was the DNA recovered from under Leslie's fingernails. For years, this sample had been an enigma, an unknown male profile that yielded no matches in traditional databases. Then came the advent of forensic genetic genealogy, a discipline that transformed DNA from a simple identifier into a branching family tree. Augustine and Dupo seized upon this new technology, a powerful catalyst that promised to breathe life back into the stagnant investigation. They uploaded the unknown DNA profile, initiating a meticulous process of comparison against public databases, searching for distant cousins, for familial links that might pull the veil off the killer's identity. The trail, as it began to unfurl, led not to a local suspect, but across oceans, hinting at an international connection and a suspect with potential ties to Romania. The breakthrough was exhilarating, a jolt of adrenaline after years of quiet desperation. This international thread, however, soon tightened, its focus narrowing unexpectedly, bringing the investigation back to familiar, yet surprisingly overlooked, territory, running through public records, obituaries, and old case files. A name surfaced: Eugene Glager. The surname resonated with a chilling familiarity. A quick cross-reference with the original suspect list, compiled in the immediate aftermath of Leslie S. murder, revealed another name: Eugene Glager, Lauren's high school boyfriend. Lauren, Leslie's daughter, had dated Eugene for 5 years, a significant relationship that ended when long distance during college proved too difficult. While Eugene's past connection to the family was established, it was enough to immediately indict him. However, the investigators were relentless. They sought out Eugene's brother, Andre, hoping he could shed light on Eugene's life, his whereabouts, and his potential involvement. Andre's testimony painted a complex picture. He confirmed that Eugene had missed Leslie's funeral, a detail that had initially seemed peculiar but was then explained away by Eugene's alleged travel. Andre recalled his parents mentioning Eugene being out of town around that time, though the specifics remained hazy. This vagueness, coupled with Eugene's absence from such a significant family event, began to solidify him as a person of interest. The true depth of Eugene's past, however, began to emerge through a protection petition filed by his ex-wife. Her words painted a disturbing portrait. Eugene was described as an addict, erratic, prone to violent outbursts, including throwing objects and punching walls. The petition was a stark warning, a harbinger of the rage that investigators suspected had exploded on Drummond Avenue. The seeds of suspicion, once planted, began to sprout, nurtured by a combination of advanced science and a deep dive into a perpetrator's hidden life. The long, cold chase had finally cornered its quarry. Eugene Glager, the ghost in the DNA, the specter of a forgotten relationship, found himself apprehended upon his return to the United States. Detectives Tara Augustine and Detective Dupo had meticulously orchestrated his downfall, their patience and the relentless march of scientific advancement finally converging. The DNA sample, painstakingly recovered from a discarded water bottle, confirmed what the genetic genealogy had strongly suggested. Eugene Glager's DNA was a definitive match to the unknown male DNA found beneath Leslie Prier's fingernails. This was the conclusive piece of the puzzle, the undeniable link that had eluded investigators for over 2 decades. Brought in for questioning, Eugene initially projected an air of bewildered innocence, a man caught in an inexplicable storm. He feigned a lack of memory, his eyes darting around the sterile interview room, a stark contrast to the turbulent past his ex-wife's petition had alluded to. He requested an attorney, his voice tinged with what sounded like genuine confusion, or perhaps practiced artifice. Yet, as Augustine and Dupo presented the irrefutable evidence, the DNA match, the familial connections, the disturbing history of violence, the facade began to crumble. The Detective-S probing questions, delivered with unwavering resolve, chipped away at his carefully constructed denial. The accusatory hands up as he was taken into custody, the initial bewildered protests of "what the fuck is wrong with you?" all seemed to echo a deep-seated unease, an underlying awareness of his impending exposure. The investigators, seasoned in the art of interrogation, observed his every twitch, every hesitation. When confronted directly with the forensic reality, a subtle shift occurred. The protestations of innocence, the claims of no recollection, began to sound less like genuine bewilderment and more like a desperate attempt to outrun the inevitable. The detectives theorized a scenario born of desperation and opportunity. Eugene, perhaps struggling with addiction or financial woes, had sought to enter Leslie's home, possibly for theft, never anticipating she would be there. The unexpected encounter had triggered a primal surge of panic and rage, leading to the brutal assault. This explanation, while not directly confessed, hung heavy in the air, a plausible narrative woven from the scattered threads of evidence and Eugene's own increasingly strained reactions. The turning point arrived not with a dramatic confession, but with a calculated legal maneuver. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a protracted and damning trial, Eugene Glager, through his legal counsel, ultimately entered a plea of guilty to second-degree murder. It was an unforeseen confession, a surrender to the weight of truth. The legal proceedings, though no longer a trial of evidence, offered a final somber resolution. On August 28, 2025, Eugene Glager was sentenced to 22 years in prison, with an additional 5 years of suspended probation. This sentence, while not erasing the decades of pain for Leslie's family, represented the culmination of a relentless pursuit for justice. Sandy, whose name had been unfairly tarnished by suspicion, was finally absolved. Lauren, who had endured the unimaginable grief of losing her mother and the agonizing uncertainty of the unsolved crime, could finally begin the process of true closure, knowing that the ghost in the DNA had been identified, apprehended, and held accountable for the unforgivable act that had shattered her family so many years ago. The echoes of May 2nd, 2001 finally began to fade, replaced by the quiet, hard-won piece of a case finally closed. The echoes of that fateful May morning in 2001 finally begin to recede, leaving behind the somber understanding that even the most carefully constructed deceptions can be unraveled by time and truth. Justice, though delayed for decades, ultimately found its footing, bringing a measure of peace to Leslie Prier's loved ones, particularly her daughter Lauren. This story reminds us that the past, however buried, can always resurface, and that the pursuit of truth, even in the face of overwhelming odds, can ultimately bring closure. We hope this deep dive into the decades of deceit has resonated with you. What do you think was the most critical turning point in the investigation that finally led to Eugene Glager's apprehension? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and join us on Content Channel for more captivating true crime stories. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time for another story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. What if the true motive behind Eugene's violent act remains a shade of grey, forever lost in the depths of his blackout?